The following programming is sponsored by Marc J. Bernstein. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or Beasley Media Group. Entrepreneur, founder, author, and financial advisor, Marc Bernstein helps high-performing business owners turn their visions into reality. At March Forward, Marc and his partners and associates think out of the box to partner with their clients in regards to their visions for their lives, their businesses, and their legacies. And through his innovative work with the Forward Focus Forums, Marc connects entrepreneurs to resources that help to fuel their success. Founders Forum is a radio show and podcast where entrepreneurs share their journeys, reveal the stories behind their successes, and the lessons they've learned. Join Marc and his guests for a mix of inspiration, valuable insights, and a bit of fun. Now let's dive in.
Good morning, America. How are you? Yeah, I say that, and I try to say it enthusiastically, and we're going through some interesting times, but I really hope that you're having a good morning or evening or wherever you are, whatever time of the day it is. I hope it's a good one. I'm here this morning. By the way, we're doing this on Zoom today, which we don't usually do. And my background, my guest will see this, and maybe TJ, our engineer, sees it, but I'm in the clouds today. I tried this from a picture that I took out of an airplane. And somebody the other day said, he was marveling. We had the greatest conversation because he said, looks like you're floating on a cloud, and I like feeling that way, so I put that on. So if you're seeing this on video, you might see me floating in the clouds. Anyway, my guest this morning is named Pat, and we always start with the topic of the day, and the topic of the day today is the importance of the pivot. Now, we've talked about pivot before, especially in light of the pandemic and how everybody was using that word all the time, but Pat has a slightly different outlook on where you might pivot, and I'd love to talk about with you, Pat, for a minute before we formally introduce you. So, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me here. So
My pleasure.
The pivot is something that I've kind of come to understand as I've gone through my career. To a certain extent, my career was very, very traditional. I went to college, to medical school, to residency, and became a practicing physician. And I was very much, following all the rules. But as I went through my practice, I got into this habit of spending time not only reading about my profession, but reading about things that were tangential to my profession. And in doing so, that created ideas and bridges. And when I began to plateau, I'm a surgeon, when I began to plateau as a surgeon, I asked myself two questions. What am I good at and what do I enjoy? And something gave me the courage at that time to follow those ideas. And so I've pivoted many times. I've become a teacher, I've become an administrator, I've become an author. And my latest interest is in healthcare design. But I think it's not only does it enhance one's career, but this idea of pivoting also creates passion and enjoyment in the career. And I'm in practice now 32 years following my residency, and for the most part, I've come to work every morning excited to work. And I think what allowed me to do that was this idea of pivoting. And now, of course, I'm at the end of my career, and I'm looking at the ultimate pivot, which is retirement, and trying to figure that out. And so we can talk about this later, but I'm currently writing a book. I write to help me figure out things. So part of the pivoting process, I have a peculiar habit. What I do is wake up in the morning, particularly Saturday and Sundays, but whenever I don't have a full schedule with work, and I spend a couple of times in reading, introspection, and writing. And I try to answer questions that I have in my mind, and that's invaluable in terms of allowing me to pivot.
That to me is very amazing because, look, I've worked with a lot of physicians over the years, a lot of people in the medical field, and I don't know that, and they consider themselves, like many professions, very busy, and I don't know that people take that time. I think it's a rarity that people take the time to be introspective, to ask themselves questions, try to figure out the answers. So, and I'm very attracted to having those kind of conversations with people. So I know this is going to be a fascinating conversation. You've already unleashed some really important topics, and we won't get to them all today, but we're going to get to some of them. So now let me introduce to you Dr. Patrick Roth, MD, MHA, FAANS, and FACS, founder of New Jersey Brain and Spine. That's his business. He's also chairman of neurosurgery at the Hackensack, New Jersey University Medical Center, and he's chair of neurosurgery of Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine. And he's held, as he mentioned briefly, and when we talk about the importance of pivoting, he has done a lot of other things. And he's been a neurosurgeon now, as he mentioned, for more than 30 years. He founded a large subspecialized practice, which allowed partners to pursue narrow lanes of interest. That's a very interesting subject in and of itself. We'll talk about that a little bit. And he became interested in identifying the pain generator in back pain and applying technology to solve the problem in a simple and minimal access approach, which means to me minimally invasive, I would think. And he also became interested in the relationship of mind-body and its impact on pain, which is of great interest to me. And along the way, he went back to school in his late 50s to get a degree in public health and became an administrator. And as he mentioned, also a teacher and a writer. And he's written 3 books, and he's finishing a 4th, which is tentatively called Flourishing the Ultimate Capital, which I love the title and I love the subject. So anyway, officially, welcome, Pat.
Thanks for having me.
It took a long time just to do your introduction. So there's a lot of things going on there. So a lot of moving parts, to speak in the language of a surgeon, I guess. So you tell me about your beginnings, how you became, what made you decide to become a physician, your education, and maybe intertwine that with where your entrepreneurial instincts came from, because you're not just a physician, you're an entrepreneur in a big way.
Yeah, I think I would have to say that why I became a physician and why I became an entrepreneur both date back to my father. So when I was growing up, my father, who was a neurologist, used to regale us at the dinner table with stories of interesting patients. And he loved his job. He was in private practice, so he had no boss. He was complete control of his schedule and his entire practice. And he had a history of doing entrepreneurial things, which really influenced me. For example, in the 1970s, when CAT scan was invented, he had 3 partners at the time, and they were interested in potentially buying a CAT scan machine. And his partners did an analysis of, how much did it have to run it, how much did it have to make, and it looked like it wouldn't be profitable. And my father's like, I don't care if it's profitable or not. This is the future of medicine. We're going to buy a CAT scan machine. Mm-hmm. And of course, they made a ton of money off it, even though they had predicted they wouldn't.
Right.
And the same thing happened when MRI was invented. And it was interesting. Nowadays hospitals buy these machines, but they bought the machines themselves.
Right.
In my father's job as a neurologist, he dealt with a lot of stroke patients, and he realized this is before they had the field of rehab in medicine. He realized that why shouldn't I be involved in their rehab? And so he put together a gym for his own patients and did that. Again, he did it out of what he thought was something necessary and enhancing in medicine, but he ended up making a lot of money off of it. And so when I came into practice and formed the group I'm in now.
Would you say, can I just ask you, do what you love and the money will follow? Is that part of it?
That's exactly right. That's exactly the philosophy. And so that's been it's you do what you love, but also get really good at it. Those are the 2 things. One of the things that really interests me, and this is from the work of Cal Newport. I don't know if you're familiar with him as an author, but what people, when people are trying to decide what to do in life, they're often given this terrible advice, which is to follow their passion. And what I've learned, and this is some of the work of Cal Newport, is you don't follow your passion, you create your passion. And you create your passion by getting good at something. And so, for young people, the decision is pretty easy. Just figure out what they're kind of good at and then spend a lot of time getting good at it. You don't have to worry about the passion, it will follow. And so, when we founded New Jersey Brain and Spine, in 1995, actually. The idea was, there were two concepts that I had. One was that we were going to all be super specialized in our own interest, do what we were good at and what we loved. And the
Right.
second thing was that we were going to share the money completely. So there'd be no incentive in the group to hang on to stuff that you're not that good at just to make the money. And so that's really the secret sauce of success for our group. The other thing that I really got interested in was this idea that medicine is so broken. As a surgeon, you would think that you should put all your energy into doing operations. That's where the money is, right? But we put a lot of money, a lot of time into listening to people, developing empathy. And so that's the other secret of success, because that's really what's missing in medicine. Education. We spend a lot of time
You
educating.
hear a lot about not good bedside manner amongst physicians, right? You
Yeah.
hear a lot about that.
Well,
And that would go hand in hand, I would think.
absolutely. What's so funny is I hear people say all the time, I don't care about my surgeon's personality. I just want to make sure he has good hands. No, that's totally wrong. You want your surgeon to be a human and care as well
You
as
know
have.
what? I'm right with you. I had hip replacement a few years ago, and I could have gone to one of the big factories, the guys that are rated as the best and all that. And I started going through their process, and I said, it's not for me. And I picked someone that I could relate to, that we had good conversations. He knew I wanted to play golf afterwards. He was a golfer. We were able to talk about, what life after the surgery looked like. And I went with that, and it worked out really well. So I understand that completely. And by the way, one of the things that I mentioned in your bio, which is that you encouraged your partners, everybody, to have very narrow interests, which is the opposite of what most people think they should do. They think they should be good at a lot of things. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I thought that was a really interesting observation that you had early on.
Yeah, I mean, there's been two kind of revelations I've had as I've gone through medicine. That was one of them. And um, what I discovered, for example, as I went through, just some of my personal stories, I went through this. I was a general neurosurgeon. I did everything, brain, spine. And but as time went on, I became more and more interested, and also thought that I was better at spine. And even within spine, I became more and more narrow in terms. What my sort of shtick is that I looked for simple solutions to complicated problems. So people have pain. The sort of the consensus, at least in neurosurgery, is, well, do something really big, cover all possible etiologies of the pain. And by the way, you get paid a lot to do that.
Right.
And what I got interested in doing is finding simpler solutions for people's pain, and also bringing it. So much of pain is interpretive, so working on the whole mind-body aspect of pain, because even if I stab you in the thigh with a knife, part of that pain is interpretive. That's not occurring in your thigh; it's occurring in your brain, and so you can always affect pain by working on the brain and the body at the same time. So the other thing that was really interesting to me was when I wrote my first book, which was about conservative treatment of back pain. My friend said to me, "You're out of your mind to write a book like this. You're cannibalizing your own career." And it's gonna. But what ended up happening was it made me a lot more popular, and because surgeons have it all wrong. Surgeons think patients want the best technical surgeon. No, that's not what patients want. Someone who's going to consider all types of treatment, not just surgery.
Right.
And so, that was an accident.
Everybody, I think, today loves a surgeon who will tell them that they might not need surgery, right?
Yeah. Well, it's fairly simple. All you do is, if you can put and I call this attunement, which is, it's like intellectual empathy. You put your brain into the perspective of the patient, and that's how you help the patient decide what he or she is going to do. And it never fails. But it's so hard for most surgeons. They want to do what they want to do.
It's unbelievable. By the way, time flies really fast on the show, and it's actually time for a commercial break. So we're going to take a quick one, and I want to follow up with you on that right after the commercial. So here we go.
The Sattel Institute is the leading CEO member organization dedicated to corporate social responsibility. Under the vision and leadership of its founder, entrepreneur and philanthropist Ed Sattel, the Institute brings together CEOs in Philadelphia and other cities to support the nonprofit organizations that do heroic work in our communities. The Sattel Institute believes that community is every leader's business. SI's members-only meetings and private CEO conferences give members the opportunity to hear from world-class thought leaders on crucial topics like AI, education, corporate philanthropy, and more. In addition, CEO members get the opportunity to share ideas and experience with their peers, like-minded CEOs who believe in the importance of giving back to the community and who understand the benefits companies get from embracing corporate social responsibility. The Sattel Institute charges no dues or fees. In order to join, member companies simply make a long-term commitment to the nonprofit of their choice. To find out more about membership and why so many leading companies are now part of the Sattel Institute, visit the organization's website at sattelinstitute.org. Sattel, S-A-T-E-L-L, institute.org. As Ed Sattel says, think we, not just me.
We're back on Founders Forum with our guest today, Dr. Patrick Roth. Pat, before the break, some really interesting things you said. First of all, create your passion. Don't follow your passion. Create your passion and be real good at it. And then the more narrow you can become, the more favorable you become, which is kind of reverse thinking of what most people would think. And you were just starting to talk about, you found some really unique aspects of your practice that made you kind of unique. Do you want to expand on those concepts a little bit?
Well, I guess, as a neurosurgeon, you are trained to be decisive, strong convictions. I had this vivid memory during my training of being called up in front of the chair of the program and asked a question, and I kind of gave a waffling answer. And he had a very funny voice. He spoke like this, and he said, "Dr. Roth, you have the right to be wrong, but you do not have the right to be indecisive." And that actually influenced me for many years. And I realized one of the things I liked about being a surgeon was being decisive. Patients love it because you're confident. But what I've learned as I've gone through my career is that the real power in medicine is in influence. And influence doesn't come from conviction, and influence comes from being able to listen, feeling empathetic, sharing with the patient, sharing decision making with the patient. And so our practice is very much modeled along that. And at first you'd think, boy, you don't make money doing that. You don't make money educating the patient and listening to the patient, et cetera. But the bottom line is that you influence the patients and your practice continues to grow. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, I think.
Well, the other thing is, to me, I'm going to translate that into another thing I've been thinking about over the last couple of years, which is conviction means basically you're stating that you're right, that you're correct. And one of the things I've kind of discovered, I don't believe there is really any right and wrong on almost most subjects. Certain things, facts are facts, right? Although in this world, we're not even sure that facts are facts. But there is no real right or wrong. And what's more important is that you're connecting with and relating to the person that you're dealing with. So if you're a doctor, it's your patient. And that's what you're calling influence. And I think that's really admirable. And I think maybe the world is starting to tilt in your direction, but it sounds like you were well ahead of your time in your profession in terms of looking at it that way, right?
Yeah, well, there's also a really interesting concept of embracing uncertainty. So, again, people have this tremendous need to make up their minds. They can't stand being in areas of gray. Right. But there's lots of evidence to suggest that, say you have a very big decision you want to make. Instead of making it, sleep on it. Mm-hmm. And what happens is the right hemisphere of your brain mulls over it while you're sleeping. And sometimes the answer comes to you when you're taking a shower or something like that the next day. But people have shown, the psychologists have shown, that you make better decisions if you let it stew in your brain for a while before you actually make it. And so you learn to be comfortable in certainty. One of the things that in medicine resides for the most part in the margins of science. It's not we have this evidence-based medicine that we're confronted with, but for the most part, no individual patient ever really falls into that solidly. So medicine is interpretive, and there's a real benefit to embracing uncertainty before you actually make a decision.
So there's an art to medicine as well as a science.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many other things I want to go through with you. So one of the things you mentioned to me is, and you kind of mentioned it briefly here, but we had talked about it earlier, which is that you wondered why you come to work happy every day. You know, I know so many physicians and lawyers, I'm a lawyer by background, that, you know, professionals that come to work and they're not happy. They don't like what they're doing. They can't wait to retire because they can't stand what they're doing for whatever reasons. And you wondered why that wasn't you. You wondered why you came together. You were happy every day. And in fact, that's, I think your next book that's coming out kind of hits on some of that. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, you know, when I walk around the hospital cafeteria, all I do is hear doctors whining about medicine. And I always ask myself, why is it that I don't whine? Why do I come to work enjoying it? And so as I was sort of researching that subject, I got really interested in the subject of positive psychology, which came out of the University of Pennsylvania. You know, psychology prior to that point had been concerned with taking people who had deviant psyches and trying to normalize them. But no one had ever taken normal psyches and tried to optimize them. And so this came out of the University of Pennsylvania. And and I realized as I read some of the tenets there that it was something that I was doing naturally. And so it helped me and I do more of it. So, you know, one of the obvious things is to invest in people and relationships. And you can do that as a surgeon. You know, in the operating room or in the office, there's a little microcosm environment which you can invest in, and that pays tremendous dividends. I'm sure it's the same for you, the staff around you with this radio show, right? You've invested in it, I'm sure, and that creates happiness and positive feelings.
Yep. Yep. So the people around you, you use the word social determinants, and they're, you know, and I know those things influence health and longevity as well. Obviously, as a physician, do you want to comment on that aspect of it briefly?
Yeah, I mean, look, people think that going to the doctor is the way they should deal with their health, but healthcare is really disease care. Healthcare, and if you look at health as an entity, healthcare only accounts for about 15% of our health. The other 85% are the social determinants of health. And you can build health, the way you eat, the way you exercise, the way you sleep, the way you handle stress, and really the way you organize your career are all ways of building your own health that reside outside of the healthcare system.
I agree, and I've gone through a lot of that reconfiguring because of my health, the way I conduct my business in my life over the last 10 to 15 years. And I feel way younger now than I did then. Let's put it that way, to quote Bob Dylan in a way. So I know you're a music fan, so I'll bring that into it. I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. Do you, let's talk a little bit. So you are typical retirement age, and you mentioned before trying to figure out retirement, but I know at the same time you have a 10-year vision. So if you and I are talking 10 years from now, which I hope we'll be doing, which would be on April 29th, 2036, and what would have to happen over that 10-year period, Pat, for you to feel like that would have been a successful period in your life? What does that look like?
Great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that I've gone through, and I've seen this written, but it's really a great concept. I've kind of gone from the resume building part of life to the eulogy building part of life. You know, instead of being interested in how you pad your resume, start to build the things that people will say about you at your funeral. And so one of the things that is going to be essential to me is that I increase, because being a neurosurgeon gave me limited time sometimes, but I want to make sure that I really establish relationships with family, friends, etc. It's really important to me. The other thing is, obviously it's a use it or lose it in terms of your brain. But one of the things that people don't understand, that if you could pick one thing to preserve your brain as you age, it would be some form of aerobic exercise. Everybody talks about learning language and doing crossword puzzles, but probably the most proven stimulant for longevity in the brain is aerobic exercise. So I want that to be a very solid part of my future. And then as I transition away from being a surgeon, I think that what I would love to get involved with in an entrepreneurial way, because I think it's so broken, is healthcare design. One of the biggest flaws of medicine right now is that the treatment that patients get depends on whom they see first, as opposed to what they have. It's a crazy idea. And so I believe medicine could be redesigned so that the patient's treatment is not affected by the personal interests of the provider they just happen to see first.
That sounds like a big project, though.
There's so many people benefit from medicine financially that it's very hard to change the system.
Right. Listen, there's actually, without getting into it, there was a candidate for Surgeon General who I listened to, and a lot of people thought she was a kook, but she actually made a whole lot of sense, because she talked about, how much influence the pharmaceutical industry and the fast food industry have on medical schools today. It's shocking when you hear where all the funding comes from and where all the information comes from. There's this big, to your point, intricate financial network that's hard to break, much like our political system, right? But so it's a massive job, and I'm glad you're taking it on.
Brian.
I love that. Real quick, because I know we talked a little bit about music before, and one question I'm really anxious, you have a broad based interest in music. What is your favorite song?
Well, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you two songs, because as I mentioned to you earlier, I grew up in a traditional rock environment and then really moved to alternative rock, and have spent the last 15 years. So as a traditional rock album, by the way, part of it's the whole history behind it, but the God Only Knows by the Beach Boys. Off the Pet Sounds
That's
album.
many people's favorite song.
Yeah, it's just because when the Beach Boys released that album, it got the Beatles and the Stones' attention. It was such an incredible, and it's such a beautifully written album. But that song to me is the favorite on the album. And then the other song I would say to you is, you've probably never heard of it, but it's a group called the Porcupine Tree, which is considered a progressive rock group, and it's the song I love is "I Drive the Hearse," which is incredibly melodic. It's a Pink Floyd-ish type of song, melodic but just beautiful, and it's probably one that your listeners have never heard,
including me. And I listen to a lot of music, so I'm going to check that one out. One real quick favorite book, and that's all we have time for after that.
One of my favorite books is "Stumbling Onto Happiness" by Daniel Gilbert. He's a psychologist at Harvard, and it's a brilliant book. Changed my life reading it.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all we have time for. So I want to thank you for being here. It's a really fascinating conversation. We may need to do it again sometime. And thank you all for listening. Thank you for being here this week on Founders Forum.
Founders Forum was brought to you in part by March Forward, LLC. We partner with entrepreneurs like you to assist in accomplishing your future vision, your life, your business, your legacy. Comprehensive wealth planning that starts with you, not a product. We hope you enjoyed your time with Founders Forum and that you found something of value to take with you throughout your day. Join us again next week for another episode of Founders Forum on WWDB 860 AM Philadelphia or on your favorite podcast streaming service. Securities offered through DFPG Investments LLC, DFPG. Investment advisory services offered through Diversify Advisory Services LLC, Diversify. DAS and DFPG are affiliated entities. March is unaffiliated with DAS and DFPG. Members FINRA/SIPC. The information provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as investment advice. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Diversify or DFPG.